let's continue with your life story. You've now moved to California and have settled in San Rafael. It's 1958. The kids are settled in school. What happened that first year?
Well, that summer we went back to Salt Lake, and while we were there, Janet was having problems. She had been in an accident and broken her shoulder and hadn't been able to work and get enough money to go to school. And I says, well, why don't you come and live with us, because you don't have to pay for tuition to go to school in California. Well, she was really excited about that because she wanted to get away from home anyway. She was getting a little upset with her father and a boyfriend that she'd broken up with, and so anyway, she accepted our invitation and came back and went to school that fall. Enrolled in the San Rafael High School, while Ken and Kathy went to Silvera, and Lynette went over to kindergarten in Hoffman, and Scott was still home. That was quite an experience for us to have a teenager in our home. We really didn't communicate too well or know quite how to handle a temperamental teenager. So we had our challenges, but it was a good experience, and she did enjoy her school and made a good friend there. One of the girls in the ward, and I guess the children all liked school. I was busy babysitting when Janet couldn't. I ended up, after she left the next spring, I ended up babysitting for some of those that she used to babysit for, because I really didn't have anything to keep me home, and the children, my children, were old enough to stay by themselves, so I'd go down the street and stay with well, I can't even think of their names now.
Charles.
No. Across the street, he was an architect, landscape architect. Anyway, we had some very good experiences in Marin County in the 20 years we lived there. In 1960, our stake our ward was taken out of San Francisco stake, and a new stake was created with the Napa stake and the Santa Rosa. Napa stake, Santa Rosa stake were divided up, and San Rafael ward was put with Santa Rosa stake. And Carl Coombs and Weston Rowe was made president of the stake. Carl Coombs as first counselor, and Sidney Henderson as second counselor. And Reed was called to be a high councilman, and I was called to be a counselor in the state primary. And the night Reed was before the stake meeting, Reed received a call from the president of the stake, President Rowe, to come up to Napa. They wanted to talk to him. And so we both went up there and were interviewed by President Kimball, Elder Kimball at the time, who was actually the apostle over that region. And I don't remember the name of the general authority that we talked to first, but he was set apart by Elder Kimball. On the Sunday that the stake was organized. And later on during that week, I received a call and was asked to be a counselor to Catherine Reed as in the primary, and Donnelly Henderson was to be her first counselor. And it was interesting, too, that before I was called, I had this feeling something was going to happen. I wasn't quite sure what it was, but something was in the wind, and I had this feeling. So when I got this phone call to come down to Greenbrae Ward that the president of the stake wanted to talk to me, I wasn't really surprised, except I was speechless. I couldn't believe I was going to be working in the stake, because all these years I'd only had one time that I had worked in the stake, and that was for just a few months in the Relief Society as secretary. Catherine Reed, I did not know at all. And when the first time I met her was when she came down and picked me up down in Marinwood on the road, and she said she knew when she saw me standing there that that's who it was that she was to meet. It was really interesting that she would know when she'd never even seen me before. When we first moved to Marin, we were members of the San Rafael Ward, but it met in Greenbrae, and Carl Coombs was the bishop. And that was the husband of my cousin Melita. So we were really pleased to be in the same ward with them, but it wasn't but a couple of 3 months later that we were divided off, and San Rafael Ward was divided and made Greenbrae and San Rafael. We still met in the same ward, but at a different time. However, our first introduction to the ward was in the San Rafael Ward with Carl Coombs as bishop, and we were asked to speak, and the whole family participated on the program. Do you remember that, Ken? I think you gave a talk, and Kathy gave a little talk, and Scott and Vanette were supposed to sing a little song, and Scott fell asleep during the meeting, so they didn't sing. Let's see, what else can I tell you? Oh, for almost 5 years, I worked in the stake primary, and we visited the 11 wards and branches in the stake. They extended clear to Fort Bragg and Lakeport. In fact, the last part of my time in the stake primary, they even took Covelo in as a branch. So we visited Willits and Sebastopol and Healdsburg, Windsor. Windsor was the Lamanite branch, is where they met. And we used to go up and visit the Lamanite branch, and that was an interesting experience, where those Lamanites, actually, they took charge of the meetings and taught the classes and everything, but they had missionaries from the other wards that were there to help supervise them. One day, I don't even remember the name of the tribe, but it was a matriarchal a form of government there. Their chief was a woman. She wasn't a member of the church, however. I remember one time when we met there, they didn't have any piano accompanist, so I played the piano for them. Do you remember that? Well, anyway, we enjoyed I enjoyed working in the primary. I was over the girls' program, the Gay Notes, the Firelights, and the Merry Hands, and we had activities. They were Merry Hands then. They've since been changed to Merry Miss. We had daddy-daughter parties and mother-daughter parties, and I was asked to be guest speaker at several of the mother-daughter parties that took place in the summertime, which is a real challenge. It was while we were living in Lucas Valley that Ken graduated from high school, and well, they all graduated from high school in Lucas in Marin County, in Terra Linda. And Ken went on his mission from there, went to Germany, and I'll let him tell about his mission someday. He's gone for 3 years, 2 years.
Do you remember my mission? What did you do on my mission?
Well, while he was on his mission, actually before he went on his mission, while he was at the BYU, and incidentally, he did graduate as valedictorian of Terra Linda High, and we're very proud of him, and also the other children. They all were very good students. But when he left for college, I decided I better go to work and help support him on his mission. So that's when I went to work for the Pool Sweep Company. When I asked to be released from the primary state primary, so that I could devote my time to first brushing up on my business skills. So I went to night school, adult training at night, and took shorthand, beginning shorthand and advanced shorthand, both the same night, and type. And then I also took a civil service preparation. I didn't finish that because I took that while I was actually working at Arneson Products, because I really wasn't happy working at Arneson's. I was under a lot of pressure there and doing a lot that was a real strain on me, health-wise. So anyway, I took the civil service test and I passed it. And I was offered a job in the post office, and at the same time I was offered a promotion at Arneson's, and So I decided to stay on at Arneson's because they gave me a less work and a specific work. Instead of doing everything in the whole office, I was narrowed down to doing just a few things, which made it easier. So I didn't take this job. Besides, it was working night shift, and Reed wasn't happy about my doing that, so I didn't do it. So I had another automobile accident during that time, and it was another rear-ender, and this time I was taking a group of Sunday school kids out to Stinson Beach, to a beach party. Ken and Kathy were in the Sunday school class, and so I was providing the transportation. Noreen Deaver was the teacher, but she couldn't go, so I took them out, and on the way back, we ran into some construction on the Highway 1, and I was following a street sweeper, and the street sweeper had stopped for a truck that was parked across the road, filling his truck up with dirt, hauling it away, and as we were stopped, a car came up fast behind me and hit my car, and I got another whiplash. And this one was really maybe not as bad in a way, but because I was already had a weakened condition, it hit me harder. And I ended up in the hospital for a couple of weeks in traction, and it didn't do any good, so they finally let me out of the traction, and then I had therapy for months, and finally I was able to get along without too much medical treatment. The chiropractor did me more good than the medical treatment anyway, and that's when I started to get better. We had a lot of experiences in the 70s that I don't want to go into now. Well, if I must. After that accident, it was in 65, wasn't it? And then in the 70s, Reed was out surveying. In fact, several of us were out surveying for the ward, as a ward for the government, getting the opinion of people about this pornography. And he was down in Mill Valley, and he was climbing up these steep steps, different places, and this one particular place, the dogs came out as he was going up the steps, and he turned around to see because it looked like they were attacking him, and it frightened him, and he stumbled and fell and broke his leg again, the same leg. It bent the plate, in fact. And that's where he set his own leg while he was waiting for the ambulance. And again, he was taken to the vet's hospital. Thank heavens he was able to go to the vet's hospital, or would never been able to make it. Also, during that time, I had a hysterectomy, and Scott broke his neck diving into the Russian River. And Kathy had a baby, and Vanette about bled to death. Had to go to the hospital from hemorrhaging. Ken and Sue were back in Boston at that time, so they didn't get in on any of the excitement.
You did come to visit us.
And we did come to visit. Vanette and Reed and I went to visit Ken and Sue back in Boston and got to go sailing and visiting the ancestors' graveyards and seeing their tombstones and visiting the school that Ken was attending. He even took me into the courtroom where he held some of his classes, right? And what else? Saw the historical places. It was a real interesting trip. In fact, the first trip we'd ever been on, except going back to Salt Lake to visit the family. The next trip we took was that we went on was up to the northwest in Canada. That was the first and only trip Reed and I ever took alone. We'd been to the family reunion in Salt Lake, the Allen reunion, and left from there and went up the northwest, up into Canada, and down the coast, and stopped in Seattle and saw our old home, or drove by it, and stopped and saw friends along the way in Oregon and Washington, and it was a real nice trip. Anything else? What else?
Dad changing jobs, according to...
Oh yes, in 1978, Reed was very dissatisfied with his position and what he was doing with Bauer. What was the name of the other fellow? Yano and Bauer. And so a headhunter contacted him and asked him if he would be interested in a job down in Palo Alto. And he was about to accept it. What was the name of the company? Carlos Abrams. And his Herman Bauer, he was about to accept it, and he told Herman Bauer, his boss, that he was going to accept the job. And he said, "Well, if you stay with me, I'll match the salary you're getting down there." And he says, "I need you to take charge of the office because I'm going to be going to Europe, to Germany, and I'll be gone for about 3 months." And so he decided to stay, and he did take over. And when he got back, Herman said, "Well, now that I'm home, I don't think that we can afford to pay you that much. And since we can't afford to pay you that much, I'll have to deduct what I've already paid you from your paycheck that you're going to be getting," which is a real dirty trick. And this really upset him. So he called up Carlos Abrams and he said, "Is that job still open?" And Carlos Abrams says, "It sure is, and I was about to call you and ask you if you'd reconsider and come down here." And he says, "Well, I've reconsidered and I'll accept the position." So he moved down there, and in the meantime I stayed up in San Rafael and got the house ready to sell and move. And I guess we were there from July until October. Oh, in July we had an Allen family reunion up in the Sierras. And also Lillian died. Lillian Clausen, who Reed and I had been taking care of. We'd sort of been given charge of her by the bishop because she was alone, a widow, and she needed help. And so Reed and I were really responsible in helping her. And when she thought that we were going to move the first time, she was really devastated. She said, "If you move, I'll die." Well, we didn't move then, and she died, and then we moved. It seemed like it just worked out so that we were able to stay with her and take care of her, and I even arranged the funeral and took care of all her business for her and everything, financial business, while we were there. So then Ken and Sue came up and helped us put in a new lawn and fix up the yard, and we put carpet down. We made the house look like a palace and had an open house, and the first people that came through wanted to buy it. And so we were able to move down to the Bay Area, the peninsula. We tried to find a house near Ken and Sue's place on Grove Avenue, but there was a couple of houses there too, and we were really interested in them, but they wanted to close at the wrong time for us. We wanted to close earlier. So we looked further and decided to look out in Silicon Valley, out in Sunnyvale. And our real estate agent says, "Oh, you don't want to live out there. The economy is very shaky, and if you buy a house out there, you might be stuck with a house you can't get rid of." What a joke that was and is today. The house we bought then is gone up 4 times the price we paid for it. Anyway, that was an answer to our prayer too, because we couldn't find anything. I'd come down on weekends and we'd look for a place, and this one weekend we looked in the paper and Reed spied this place out on Wolf Road. So we called our real estate agent and had her make arrangements to go see it, and I walked into it. And I said, "This is just what I want. It's got a swimming pool and not a very big yard, but it's a nice house plan, and it's really a nice place." And so she said, you don't want to make up your mind yet. Just look around a little bit. So we looked around and we came back and we bought that place. And that's where we stayed until we lived there until when? When I moved down to Dixie. And I'll have to tell you about that. After we'd been there, after we'd been there for just 1 year, we had had a lot of problems with Vinette losing her husband, Larry, and then I'd gone to help her, and then the next year Kathy was expecting a baby, and I went to help her. And then I came home from helping her and found Reed had a bad cold and wasn't feeling well. And not too long after that, he came home from work sick, just as white and as pale as a ghost. And he didn't tell me he was sick, but he went in the bedroom. And I went in to see what was the matter, because Mother and Dad Midgley had just arrived that day, and we'd been talking to them, and I was busy in the kitchen, and all at once I noticed Reed wasn't around, and I went in to see where he was, and he was sitting on the edge of the bed, doubled over, and I said, "What's the matter?" And he says, "Well, I've got a pain in my chest and down my arm." And right then I called the doctor or the emergency, and they said, "Bring him right in." And he had angina. And they said, "We want to keep him overnight under observation." And so they kept him overnight, and the next morning Ken called up and said, "I'd like to come and administer to Dad." So he came over and got Dad Midgley and Mother and I, and we went into the hospital, and they administered to him, and he was having a heart attack at that time, a real bad one. And after he was administered to, he leveled off and he was all right. And then again that afternoon, he had another one, a real massive heart attack, and that we found out later was brought on because they gave him morphine and he was allergic to it. And they gave him the morphine for the pain he was having for the angina, and it brought on the heart attack. Both of them. And when he told him he was allergic to it, I told him too, and they said, well, we had to decide whether to give him the morphine or let him stand the pain. We thought it was better for him to have the morphine. So anyway, for 28 days he pulled through that 72 hours, those first 72 hours, and the doctors heaved a sigh of relief because not many other patients ever pulled through that 72 hours. In fact, while we were there, several of them had been brought in and died that night. But he pulled through and was doing pretty good, and they let him come home for Easter. It was Easter Sunday and conference at the same time. And he wanted to come home so bad that they let him come home on Saturday afternoon. And he listened to conference and just was so thrilled to come home. And yet that night he was in terrible pain. The next day he was in pain. And by Sunday afternoon he was gasping for air, and so I called the hospital, and they said, he asked if he could have some oxygen, and they said, no way, you bring him right back to the hospital. In fact, they sent an ambulance after him and took him back in and put him in intensive care, and he stayed there for another 2 or 3 days. And then Wednesday afternoon, this bishop came in while I was there and talked to him, and they were both had a good sense of humor, and they were joking back and forth. I was really surprised because he was acting so good, so happy and well, when he looked like he was really failing fast before. And the bishop left, and he said to the bishop before he left, Bishop, I think you better release me from my job as executive secretary because I'm going to be working, and I don't think I can hold down both jobs. And they really need me at work. And in fact, I have an appointment with one of the men from work. He's coming down tomorrow afternoon. I'm going to help him work out one of his problems. But that night he passed away. And just a few minutes after the bishop got home, I called and told him, and he came back again. Ken and Sue came in, and they took me home with them and took good care of me from then on from then until 1984. But we had a beautiful funeral service for him, both here in Sunnyvale, and then he was shipped to Salt Lake, and we had another funeral service for him then. Ken and Scott both gave beautiful tributes to him, and so did his other friends that were asked to speak, and I got lots of cards and letters from friends and relatives telling me how much they appreciated knowing him. But he was a good man, and we had a good marriage, and I loved him very much. And I was very lonely without him, and yet I knew I had to keep going. And I had severe arthritis. It got so bad that my legs were so swollen that I finally had to resort to crutches. And my foot even got so bad I couldn't put any weight on my foot. But I kept going, and I had 3 different people come and stay with me. First, I was living alone, and the Tuckers called and asked me if there's any chance of their son coming down and staying there and going to work. He needed a place to stay, so I let him come and stay for a couple of months. And when he left, my friend Irene, Irene Wilkins, needed a home, and so I invited her to come and share my home with me, and she stayed there a year, and then she moved into low-income housing, and later was married. And then I got a call from the bishop asking me if I'd be willing to take in another boarder. This was a young man with a family, and he had a job here, and his family lived in Fresno, and he needed a place to stay. He had diabetes, and he had to be where he could get food and be where there was someone that knew him. So his name was Rick Beckham. So he stayed with me for a while, and then then a young lady needed a home, and Rick was going to leave, but she needed one right away, and I said, well, I guess I can take on another boarder. So I had her in one room and him in another and me in another, and it worked out pretty good for a while. But I got a call from my mother, and she said she needed me. She was having problems, and she needed me desperately. She was having bleeding ulcers. And I says, Mother, I can't come right now. I've got to give a class in Relief Society, teach a class in Relief Society. I was a compassionate service leader, and I had to give a lesson every 3 months it was. I says, after I give this lesson, then I'll come and help you. So I got on the plane the next Monday and flew to Las Vegas and stayed overnight there. And then with the Coombs. No, I didn't stay overnight. Mother had their friends come and pick me up. The Jollies.
How much it cruises?
Oh. Well, this is... Yeah, while Irene was with me, she had a chance. She wanted to go on a cruise. I'd never even heard of what a cruise was before. And I says, hey, can I come along? She says, sure. So, actually, my feet were so bad that the doctor wanted to operate on them, and I was all scheduled to be operated on. I had the date set and everything, and then Irene was going on this cruise, and I had a chance to go too, so I canceled the operation and went on the cruise. But before I did this, I had a dream, and I dreamed that Reed came to me in the hospital, and I was in the hospital for something. It was an operation, but it wasn't my feet. And he says, I don't want you to have that operation. You don't need it. He says, come outside with me. So he took me outside of the hospital, and we played with the children. The grandchildren were there, and he was frolicking with them, and I says, hey, come and talk to me. I says, I want to know what it's like on the other side. Won't you tell me? He was all dressed in white. And I said, won't you tell me about it? He says, oh, I can't. He says, I've got to go now, but I'll be around. And so my dream ended. And then I had a chance to go on this cruise, and I thought, well, maybe I'm not supposed to have that operation after all, so I'll just go on the cruise and enjoy it. So I did. Went on crutches, and they really laid the red carpet out for me because I was on crutches. Surprising how much attention you get when you're on crutches. But we had a lot of fun. But I felt that Reed was with me. It was really a wonderful feeling. He was on the cruise with me. And when I got back, I guess it was around April. I dreamed of him again, that he was there, and that a big black man came and took him home. Took him back to heaven. I haven't dreamed about him since, to speak of, you know. It's really interesting.
Did you meet any Casanovas on the cruises?
Well, there's some that Irene says, well, that fellow looks like he's interested in you. Why don't you give him a smile? I said, I'm not interested. So anyway, I went on 2 other cruises after that. I went to the Bahamas. This one was down to the Caribbean. And then we went to the Bahamas with Irene and her daughter and her husband and the Holtz from our ward. There were quite a group of LDS people that went. We even held church on Sunday morning in the library with our little group. We had a great time. And then we went on another cruise down through the Panama, and that was really interesting. But I won't go into that. I've got scrapbooks telling all about that. But what I want to tell you before I end my story is I did go to help Mother, and she was feeling better by then. Pretty much better anyway. And that was on a Saturday.
What year? 84?
1984. October 1984. I just got back from my Panama cruise. Julie had been born while I was gone, and I got a telegram. Everybody on the ship knew about it. Well, anyway, I'd sold Dad's drafting board that I got for him to what's his name now? Delmar Hansen. And he'd never paid me. And he said, I says, well, I've got to have that money. I need that money. Because things were getting kind of hard, financially. And he said, well, when I see you next, he says, when are you coming to St. George again? And I says, well, I'll be coming one of these days. He says, well, when you come again, give me a call and I'll bring the money over to you. So I gave him a call when I got into Washington, and he came over and brought me the money, $100, took me out to dinner, and then he took Mother and Cord and I over to see his log cabin. He's built a log cabin, and he was also selling them, and he was trying to get Cord interested in helping him sell them. So anyway, that next day, Cord said to me, he says, you ought to get married. He says, Delmar Hansen isn't such a bad guy. Why don't you consider him? I told him the last time I met him that I was not interested in getting married, and he said the same thing, and I still mean it. And he says, but you're too young to live alone the rest of your life. I says, that's all right. I'm having lots of fun. I'm going on cruises and special interest firesides. I didn't go to any of the dances with Irene. I stayed home, and she thought I was a stick in the mud because I wouldn't go with her, but I didn't like to go out to those dances. But anyway, the next day, after they had said that, Mother says, well, there's a fellow in our ward, or in the other ward. He's a real nice fellow, and he just lost his wife a little while ago, and he's rather lonely. Wouldn't you like to meet him? And I says, no way. No way am I ever gonna. I'm not interested. Well, you can at least be a friend, I says, I'm not interested. So Sunday morning, or Sunday after church, they said, let's go for a ride. Okay. Got in the car. They go down past his house on First South, and see those beautiful flowers? The man that lives here promised me a start of those chrysanthemums. Do you mind if I stop and find out when I can get a start of these chrysanthemums? He says, okay, if you want to, and I'll take a picture of them. Oh, they were so pretty. And he said, incidentally, this is the man who I told you about. Won't you come up and meet him? I said, I'll take a picture. You go to the door. So she goes to the door, and from what I hear, she told him that she had a daughter that she wanted him to meet. So they motion me over after I take this picture, and Mother introduces us, and he invites me into his parlor. The spider and the fly. And I was so impressed with him. He was sitting there reading his Bible, or Book of Mormon, and he was so genteel looking and handsome, and I thought, hey, this is not bad at all. And then we visited for a while, and then Mother said, we're going for a drive out here to see my property. Would you like to go along with us? And he said, sure. So he got in the back seat with me, and we just yacked away, telling each other about ourselves a little bit. He did most of the talking, though. And he did. I learned a lot about him. He was really selling himself. Good salesman, too. And before the ride ended, he asked to take me out to dinner. And I accepted, but then I said, Monday is family home evening. I really ought to stay with, have family home evening with my parents. How would you like to come and have it with us? And then I thought, no, they can't, or have dinner with us. And then I remembered they eat in the afternoon, so I invited him to come in the afternoon. And then I went home and I thought, what have I done? Here I've invited a strange man to dinner. I don't even know him, and I don't even know this kitchen or what's in it. And so I decided, well, let's see, beef stroganoff, that ought to be easy to fix. So I got all Mother's stale food out and ran to the store and got what I needed and fixed dinner, and he came over, and he did pretty good. I think he didn't get an indigestion, did you? No, he didn't get indigestion. So after dinner, I started clearing the table away to do the dishes, and Mother says, why don't you two go for a ride? I'll do the dishes. So he took me for a ride. We went up and visited the Jacob Hamlin house and did some more talking, and he offered, I don't know whether he offered to take me over to the airport that day or on Sunday. I think it was on Sunday you even offered to take me over, because I was telling him that the Jollies had to come and get me because Dad Midgley didn't want to drive over there to the airport.
To Las Vegas?
Uh-huh, in Las Vegas. So anyway, that week we dated each other every day, every night, every day, and Sunday we went to up to see his family. On a Monday we went up to
His family was his daughter?
his brother's 80th birthday was having a open house, so he invited me to go up there with him to see them. And then Monday was family home evening with a group he used to meet with. So he took me over there, and they all, they started talking about how they met their husbands and their courtship, and it was like they expected us to get married. Right? So it kind of...
You haven't said his name yet.
I haven't. Well, his name is Dan Wade. Daniel Lay Wade. And so I would go home every night and think about him and what I liked about him, and we talked a lot about what we were going to do and with our lives, and he decided he was going to and so we went to the temple on Wednesday night, or Wednesday afternoon, and he held my hand in the temple. That was the first time he'd held my hand. And then things started happening inside of me. He took me to a show, and then we decided that it might be fun to get to know each other better. And so I will let that be enough for tonight. Well, to continue on with the story of our romance, we not only visited historical places like Jacob Hamlin's house and visited his family and his friends, but we went to the senior citizens dances. There were 3 of them that week, and we went to all 3 of them, and we had so much fun, and everybody welcomed him back and said, "Where have you been all this time? We've been wanting to have you come and join us." And I thought, this is great. I found someone that likes to dance, and I'll be able to go to dances again now that my feet are so I can get around. And so that made me think a little bit more about maybe it would be nice to get married again. And yet I was hesitant about it. But every night after being with him for a while and talking more about our lives and our problems and so forth, I thought more about how we could be happy together, his interests and my interests. Even though they were different, we could still learn to do things together. He had started golfing. I thought, oh, I'm going to learn how to golf. And anyway, I had plane reservations to fly back to Sunnyvale on Tuesday. And I was to leave Monday so I could stay overnight at Melita's and Carl Coombs and have them take me to the airport. And the first time I mentioned I had to go to Las Vegas to catch a plane, Dan had offered to drive me over. And so the time came, and it was time for me to leave. And sure enough, he came to the house and picked me up, and also Mother and Dad Midgley. And as he came as he was leaving the house, we were walking out together, he handed me a package. And when we got in the car, I opened it up, and it was a diamond bracelet. And I thought, oh my, I can't accept anything like this. I said to him that I couldn't accept a gift like this, and I hardly know you. And he said, well, I would have given you a ring, but you said you couldn't wear a ring because your fingers were so swollen. And Mother was in the back seat, and she heard, and she said, here, Mary Grace, try mine on and see if it fits. And I slipped it on just as easy as it went on my finger, as easy as it was meant for me. And Dan says, well, in that case, would you rather have a ring? And I hummed and hawed, and by then we had stopped at, we were going into St. George, and that's where he bought the bracelet. And I said, well, probably it would be better than a bracelet. So he drove up to the jewelry store, and he took me into the store and told the clerk that we wanted to look at rings. And I say, what does this mean? And he said, well, I would like to marry you. And I said, well, you mean you want me to wear this ring so I won't change my mind when I get back home? And he says, well, that's kind of the idea. I said, well, then you better get down on your knees and propose the right way. So right there in the jewelry store, while she was going back into the back room to find me another ring, because none of the ones out in the counter suited me or my ugly hands. So while she was gone, he got down on his knees and proposed to me right there in the jewelry store. And we finally walked out to the car. Grandma and Grandpa and Mom and Dad were out there waiting for us and wondering what was going on. And then I came out and sported a ring. And they looked so happy. They were as happy as we were. So we continued on to Las Vegas, and he left me at the Coombs, and I flew home. And Sue picked me up at the airport, and I didn't show her my ring. I had my hand down where she couldn't see it. And she brought me home to have dinner with the family, and all through the dinner I kept my hand hid, and after dinner was over I just raised my hand up and said, "See what I have." Little Ken's mouth dropped. I thought he was going to lose his teeth. He says, "Do you know what you're doing?" And I says, "Well, I think I know what I'm doing. I really feel good about this, but I'm not in a hurry to get married. I want to wait a while." But Dan called up, and he said he wanted to come and visit me, and I said, "Well, I'd like to get things straightened up here at home and get organized a little better, and then we can get married." He says, "This long-distance courtship is not going to work. If you want to get married, then we'd better go ahead and plan it right away." And so I consented to getting married in December or January. I thought at first of February the 14th. And Ruth Greenman says, "Are you crazy, Mary Grace? If you're going to get married, you might as well do it and quit putting it off any longer." So we decided we'd go ahead and get married before the weather got too bad so all our family could be together. And instead of being married in St. George, we decided to go to Salt Lake and meet the family halfway because we wanted them to be there with us. Although I had a hard time talking Dan into it. He wanted to just go to Las Vegas and get married. Forget about all the what would I say, ceremonies and whatever that goes along with a wedding. But since his first marriage, he didn't have a wedding, I thought, well, it'd be good for him to have this experience. And besides, I wanted to have all the family with me. And so we were married on November the 24th, 1984, in the Jordan River Temple for time only. And all our family were there, Ken and Kathy and Scott and Vanette and their spouses, and Mother and Dad Midgley, and some of my brothers and sister-in-laws, and some of his family were there, and we had a real wonderful time. And then after the ceremony, we went to Albert Noreen's place and had a wedding breakfast. And later that evening, Ken and Sue and Sue's mother, Mary Jane, and sister, Louise, gave us a reception at the Knight's house. It's Sue's mom's house, and up in Holiday. And we had an opportunity to meet a lot of our friends and relatives there, and they all wished us happiness. And were happy for us. And so after that, we stayed overnight at the Marriott Hotel and planned on going to the Temple Square and hearing the Tabernacle broadcast the next morning. And we woke up to find snow on the ground, and it was really snowing heavily. So we decided we'd better head for Dixie before it got too bad, and it was a good thing we did because after we got down to Provo, the road was closed at the point of the mountain, and no cars could get through. Grandpa and Grandma Midgley, or my mother and Dad Midgley, came up from Washington with us, and they expected to go back with us on our honeymoon, but we changed their minds and left them in Salt Lake. Somebody else had to take them home. And we went on down to Washington and had a, where'd we have the ceremony, or the open house? Down there next? Or did we go to California? Boy, at this point I'm trying to remember. I think we went to California first. Yeah, the green ones. We had one in our own home, though. But I'm trying to think which we did first. It was such a busy time. But anyway, the green ones offered to have an open house for us at their place, and Ken and Sue were the generous ones that financed it. And then we had one in Dan's home in Washington, and invited his friends in the neighborhood and the church to come and meet me. So that way we got to introduce each other to our friends and relatives in 3 different places. And actually we both had relatives come to all 3 of them too. To get on with the story and make it as brief as possible, we decided to sell my house in Sunnyvale, but it was a year before it was sold, or almost a year. It was finally in September that we moved to. That we moved all my things to Washington. That is, what I didn't give to Ken and Scott and Vanette and Kathy. I kept a few things and gave most everything else away. And it was a good thing because he had a house full of furniture and didn't have room for much more. And yet what I did take down, it seemed to fit in just right. And so in September, we hired a mover to move my things to Washington and take the rest of the things up to Cache Valley to the girls. And before we finally sold the house, we had to travel back and forth about every 2 weeks to take care of my house and yard and the pool and take care of his place. It kept us on the road. But in between times, we did manage to get in some golfing and fishing, and we took friends with us up to Panguitch, and that's where Dan taught me how to fish, up at Panguitch Lake. And Otter and Fish Lake. And we've done quite a bit of traveling. Mostly to see our family in California and up in Cache Valley and Salt Lake. But then we decided to buy a motorhome so that when we did visit them, we wouldn't have to take someone's bed, and that didn't work out too well when we came to California, because we found out it cost us almost as much to rent a space in an RV park and to bring our motor home than to just get a motel here. Of course, Ken and Sue have always been always welcomed us to come and stay at their house, and we really appreciate it, and that's where I am tonight. And we love each one of our family very much, and we're so grateful for their love and for the good lives that they lead, and their devotion to their family and to the church, and serving others. I was called to be homemaking teacher 2 years ago, and I served as homemaking teacher for a year and really enjoyed it until finally it was difficult being there every time I was supposed to give a lesson, and I felt it wasn't fair to the Relief Society not to be there, so I finally asked to be released from that. And the reason being that I belong to Kaiser Permanente Health Group, and I'm on a very strong arthritis medication, methotrexate, which warrants that I have a blood test every month and see my rheumatologist every 6 months at least, so I have to travel back and forth every 6 months to California and visit my doctor, and then I also have a chance to visit the family too, and our friends in Sunnyvale. Besides traveling back and forth to California, we've been on a few trips. I have a timeshare, and we've used the timeshare to visit Lava Hot Springs and Island Park just out of Yellowstone, and also went to Florida and visited Epcot and Disney World, and that was quite an interesting experience. And we've traveled up to Sheridan, Wyoming to visit Dan's daughter Venice and husband Dale and grandchildren, and the Allreds. Dale and Venice Allred, Todd and Pam and Carrie Allred. Then last April, Pam was married to Domingo Flores in Salt Lake, and we attended that wedding. And later on July the 30th, Carrie was married to David. Forgotten his last name. Sorry about that. I'll think about it later. And we went to that wedding up in Sheridan, and then the Allreds moved to Bishop, and so we visited them in Bishop. And we still continue to enjoy life together. I'm glad that I married Dan. He's been a wonderful husband. He's taught me a lot, even how to make a bed the way he does, and wash dishes the way he does. Anyway, he's a good man. And he's taught me to golf and to fish. Never caught a fish before. I married Dan. And 2 years ago, I even brought the biggest fish in of the 4 in our party, 3.5 pounder. And it was really a struggle to get it in. It took me 15 minutes. I had to learn patience because it got caught in the moss, and I had to wait for it to get out of the moss before I could pull it in, but it was fun. We've had fun visiting our families, family reunions, and just having a real active life. And we have a lovely home in Washington that we really enjoy too. Now, is there anything else I should talk about? Oh, yes. Going back to some of the experiences that involved other members of the family, Reed's father died. William Barry Allen died in about 1956, October 1956. And we were living in Seattle, so we drove down to the funeral, and it was a beautiful funeral service, but we were sorry that we hadn't been able to see him before he passed away. We didn't realize he was going to go. He was in the hospital and getting along fine, thought he was going to be able to go home the next day, and he suddenly died 20 days after being in the hospital. And you know, Reed was in the hospital 20 days when he died, and practically of the same thing. Mother Allen, Rebecca, died in 1977. We had been there to the Allen family reunion, and she went to the reunion up the canyon, even though she didn't feel like going. But Vanette went out and fixed her hair up, and after she got her hair fixed up, she says, well, I might as well go, since I'm all fixed up now. So we enjoyed having her with us for the reunion. But after that, she began failing. And Reed and I left and went on a trip up to Canada and the Northwest, and when we got back home, there was a call waiting that she wasn't expected to live. So Reed got on the plane and flew to Salt Lake and was able to visit with his mother for a day, and flew back home, and he was only home, I guess, a day or so when she passed away, and then we all went back to the funeral service. My dad had a very serious accident in 1957. It happened when we were attending the groundbreaking at the Interstate Center in Oakland. He had fallen off the roof, and whether it was because he slipped off the roof or whether he had a heart attack and blacked out and fell, we don't know. But he laid there for several hours before he was discovered, and the doctor said that was the only thing that saved his life, not being moved. But he lived for 3 years, and finally he passed away in November the 7th, 1960. He did spend his last Christmas with us, and he aged so much in those 3 years, it seemed that the fall he never recovered from, and it triggered his problems, and he died of pneumonia, leukemia, and cancer, all through his body. 3 years later, my mother married Thomas Cord Midgley on the day that President John F. Kennedy was assassinated. They were married for time only in the Salt Lake Temple, and as we were preparing to leave the temple, Bernard Brockbank came in and told us of the assassination. And by the time we got out to the streets, they had an extra out on the streets, and paper boys calling the news of the assassination. And this really was a devastating experience for everybody. And we were shocked and bereaved, and we didn't know what to do. We'd planned an open house for my parents, but we didn't know whether we were to have it. But finally we went ahead and had it anyway, and had a few of our friends and relatives come and had a nice affair for them. For several years they kept two houses, one in Salt Lake and one down in Washington, where they moved after they were married several years later. And it was only after the year before we were married that they finally gave up the old house. It was in 1983. A year after we were married, Cord passed away. Dad mutually passed away from a heart attack on Thanksgiving Day at Bob's and Carol's house. And that was 2 weeks after Mother had had major surgery, removing part of her stomach because of ulcers and a growth that was in her stomach. So she had quite a hard adjustment to make. And finally she moved from her home in Washington up to Centerville, where the family could help take care of her. And of course she's made several visits down to Washington and stayed with me.
You have a telephone call right now.
Who from?
From Kathy and John. They're on the telephone right now. Let me give you the telephone.
Hello? Hello?
Talk to her. Here she is.
Okay.
Hi.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
How are you tonight?
We're just fine.
You sound kind of happy.
Well, I am happy. It's Easter, isn't it? I'm with the family.
What?
I say I'm with the family. I'm reliving my romantic era with Dan. Just finished it. Well, more or less. It's hard to think of the things you'd like to say until after, it's too late. Well,
I talked to Banana on the phone yesterday, and it's been 2 months since I talked to her. That's what's so bad.
how's she doing?
Pretty good. I heard on the news about this baby that fell down a mine shaft.
Yes, I
And
did
I
too.
called her. I said, is everybody all right? I just worried.
She said that was her next door neighbor.
It was?
Yeah.
You mean the mine shaft is that close?
They've got one on the property next door to us.
Oh,
That one's
dear.
mine.
Well, I hope they're...
The one that's next to them is covered up. And that's where we parked when we were up there. That piece of property that we parked on, that's the lot next door. She says there's a mine shaft there that's boarded over and has dirt piled up on top of it. And most of them are like this. But it's not her next door neighbor. It's Gary's ex-next door neighbor. Down by his old house.
Oh, I see.
And that's where it was.
Uh-huh.
It was down there.
Well, that'll at least give them a warning to be careful and not take any chances with their children.
A lock that Alexis can't get out the back door.
Uh-huh. You mean she is?
About the age where she'd be doing that.
You say they're going to put a lock on it.
She says she's going to go down and buy one. So she
Yes.
can walk out of the house like she does.
Uh-huh. She does do that, huh?
Oh, she always has done that. did it at Manette's house here.
She did?
When she's at that impish age where she does what she wants.
Uh-huh.
It's a lot like Becky, you know.
I bet you miss them there, don't you?
Yeah, and she didn't want me to get off the phone. And I thought, well, it sure is nice to have you miss me, Vanessa. She's sure happy, she said.
Well, she's got a good husband, and that makes all the difference in the world.
Doesn't it, though?
I know it.
Yeah. Dan says you've been visiting with some doctors. What do they have to say?
Oh, not much.
Are you having problems?
You've been helping them more than they help you.
No, I'm just... While I was here, I decided I'd see all the doctors I need to about all the little problems like eyes and feet and in between.
Eyes and your feet in the in-between part.
Right. So anyway, the doctor says he doesn't think I ought to continue going to him. I should get a doctor closer because with this powerful drug I'm on, I could suddenly lose all my white blood cells and die.
Because they can be wiped out from the chemotherapy drug.
Yeah. But it's been approved by the FDA now. It wasn't approved until last November, and I've been on it for almost 7 years.
Huh? You've been on it for 7 years?
Yeah. Well, I've been married 4 years, and I was on it. Maybe it wasn't 7; it was 6 years I've been on it.
So it's one of those things that they don't really know what'll happen with it, but it makes you feel better.
Yes, it sure does. But I have to have a blood test every month. And a liver test every 6 months, 4 to 6 months. So I have really been blessed because I have had no side effects from it. And as long as things stay the way they are, I don't have to worry.
What did you say, Mom?
I say I don't have to worry if I stay as healthy as I am now. And neither does anyone else.
Well,
You have been enjoying pretty good health, haven't you?
Yes, I have. In fact, when I see my old friends in Sunnyvale, they say I look 10 years younger than I did before I got married.
must be something good for you.
Even Ken agrees to that.
Well, maybe you've hit the top and you're reversed now and you're going to start getting younger.
Yeah. You mean second childhood? Well, I guess I'm in my second childhood.
Now, as I go to my kids' activities and I see my kids growing up and realizing that they're going to be gone in another year, 2 years, you know, I think they better stick around here because I'm going to miss out on their whole life. And I sat there thinking, Mom doesn't even know what's going on.
No, I don't.
David is playing this flugelhorn solo, and he has
A what?
flugelhorn.
What's a flugelhorn?
Like a
It's a-
trumpet,
it's
an
a deep-
oversized, mellow trumpet.
It's a mellow trumpet.
Is it?
And he played it without any music, and he's fantastic.
Oh,
And
that's
you got
great.
Your scholarship to the Y.
I got to talk to him a little bit about that, and I was so thrilled to hear he's doing so well.
And Debbie got her National Merit Honors,
She did?
and yeah, she got her academic letter. David got his last year.
Wow. Well, maybe she can get a...
We go to that, our kids are in, I think, gee, Mom doesn't even know about these. And I'm not telling you. I think, I don't know how.
Well, they inherited from their grandmother.
Huh? They
They-
inherited
they-
all. Yeah, I'm sure.
All their brains from their
I'll
grandmother.
tell you, they didn't inherit it from me.
Well, anyway, you got some real nice family, all 6 of them. All 8 of them. All 8 of you.
All 8 of us.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I can only take credit for one. Me.
No, no. I think the mother has a lot to do with
But anyway.
speaking for you, I mean, not for me. I can't take the credit for all my good kids, but I'm sure glad I've got him.
Huh?
Right.
You're glad you've got him.
All right.
I hope so. And
We are too. David's getting geared up to go on his mission. He's really excited about that.
Where does he want to go?
Anywhere.
wherever.
He'd like to go on a foreign mission.
Does he have a language?
He took Spanish.
2 years.
2 years Spanish, but that doesn't. Oh.
That doesn't guarantee him anything, though. Of
Mm-hmm.
course. But he'll be ready about the end of the year here. Another 7 months.
He
So
says you're planning to come and that you wrote a letter in answer to his letter.
You didn't ever get it, huh?
I don't think we ever got it.
I guess I just thought I wrote it. I did. I thought I did. I was trying to get all these letters written before I left on this trip, and maybe I didn't quite get that one done.
Well, that's okay. Anyway,
So I'll write
I
to him.
didn't expect you at the time. And then, he says he's going to try to be ordained an elder while you're here, too. He's wanted to do it, but they've been saying that they'd like him to wait because the bishop wanted him to wait because they need him in the priest quorum for a while.
Mm-hmm. Well, they usually don't ordain them until they're ready to go on their mission, do they?
No, they ordain him when they're 18 now.
They do.
he's been pretty active in the priest corps. Quite a bit of help with the bishop in there.
Well, you know, Grandpa Allen told us that he wasn't ordained. He was a deacon for years and years because they wouldn't ordain him to a higher office because he was such a good, dependable man to do the little things around the church that need to be done, like start the fire and get the church ready and so forth. I guess they didn't have custodians in those days. But anyway, that's what he told us once,
Oh, really?
that he wasn't ordained for quite a while.
So in those days, they had people stay in offices. It wasn't unusual for a bishop to be in a bishop for 30 years. Same with the Relief Society president.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I have a new job,
You do? What is it?
including added upon the other one. I'm a Sunday school teacher for the 15-year-old.
Well, good for you. Good for them.
Had her debut today.
You're going to do that as well as teach Relief Society?
Well, that's what the bishop would like me to do, I guess.
Well, if you can handle it, more power to you.
I can yet. I told them to get a substitute for me for Relief Society this next month and let me see how I get along with this class. I said, don't release me yet because I don't know if I want to be released. I really like the job
Mm-hmm.
because I get so much out of it. Whether they do or not, I don't know, but it compels me. You know, some people have to be compelled, and I'm one of them.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know when I was teaching, I got more out of it than anybody else, too. That's the way it is with the teacher.
I know, and I'm kind of selfish because I like it.
Well, whether you're teaching 16-year-olds or Relief Society ladies, you still have to study and you still learn.
Oh, I know. But anyway, I have that job now. And Debbie's playing piano in sacrament meeting.
Oh, is she? Is Becky playing the piano?
All the time.
And you say she doesn't read music?
Yeah, she reads music pretty good.
Oh, I thought she played by ear
memorizes
mostly.
after she learns how to read it, though.
Oh, I see. Well, that's good.
Sometimes she can read it all the way through. She's got it memorized.
Wow, what a brain.
But she's not taking lessons yet, but she does play a lot.
Hmm.
There's a lot
Well,
of practicing and
you've got a musical family. How about Danny? What's he doing?
being a pest. He's really, really talented at that.
He talented being a pest?
Cool, though.
Yeah, he has straight A's.
He does.
He plays soccer, and he wants to be an athlete. And I don't know. He says he wants to be in band, but I'm not sure if he does. He doesn't want to learn.
Well, don't you know athletes make more money than doctors?
I don't want him to be that kind of an athlete. He's a pretty smart kid. And I guess David wants to go to the Y this fall. He's still trying to decide whether he can do that or not.
Uh-huh. Well,
It's a lot different story now than it was when we were going to school.
well, it depends on what he wants to go into.
No, just going to school. Because it's so expensive. It's $10,000 a year.
Well, I mean, if he stayed at home and went up to the Utah State, would it be the same?
Yeah, except that he could stay at home.
And he wouldn't get as much out of college. I think it's best to live at the school while you're going to school.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
And participate more in
Stick
it.
around to go at home, and I just feel like I got so much more out of it because I did go away.
Mm-hmm.
learning to be away from home, learning to be on your own is a real important part of
Well, that's the way I felt about going away to college, too. And that's why I encouraged you kids to go away to college. It's good
Did you
Good
cry
experience.
thinking about me leaving just like I do?
No, I was glad to get rid of you.
I think about that all the time. I think, God, did Mom feel this way? I never knew she felt like this. Because it just tears me apart to have him leave. I just can't stand the thought.
Well, it was sure nice when you came back that summer. I thought, well, once you leave, I'll never see you again. But you did come back and work for a summer. Ken came back and worked for a summer, and other than that,
We're gone.
you were gone.
I know, I remember.
But then I never could get rid of Scott. I thought I'd lost him, and the time he crawled out of the window and ran away from home, I thought that was the end. But he came back, and then I couldn't get rid of him.
Well, he left in another way, but he's back again now.
Oh, I don't suppose it'll be as bad the next time around. But to have David leave is really hard on our whole family.
Uh-huh.
And we're so excited for him, but the kids are suffering too. Oh, what are we going to do when David's gone? Well, you might have to catch the bus.
Oh, that's all, huh?
Well, it's just part of it. Yeah, you have to learn to roll with the punches. And he's anxious to get on with his life.
Right. Well, it'll give them an opportunity.
That's what we raised him for. And we need to gird ourselves up for that just as much as he.
Well, it's nice talking to you, and I know that you are busy people and are doing well, every one of you. And I'm glad to hear from you, and hope that you'll continue on in your pursuits for excellence.
Well, we appreciate you, Mom.
Yeah, we sure do.
Well, I love you and appreciate you too.
Yeah, our thoughts a lot. We go to the temple every week.
Good, that's great.
Saturday morning is our time. I didn't go this Saturday, but John did. We had a women's conference here. And I wanted to go to that and make some Easter dresses, and I couldn't do everything. So.
But you got that done, right?
Yeah.
Good.
I did a blessing dress and helped my neighbor finish one for her daughter, and that's the one that just had her baby blessed today, plus her other 3-year-old. And I helped.
She made 2 dresses for girls.
Actually, I helped. I oversaw Debbie make one, and I made Becky's, and I bought one for Lindsay and bought one for Marianne. And the one I bought for Lindsay, I made a Kmart dress look like a ZCMI dress by adding a few little things.
Well, good. Well, you've got a real talent there, too.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
Well, it's
I-
been good talking to you.
well, thank you very much for calling.
I look forward to seeing your video.
Well, I don't know.
You're on camera, you know.
Well, I'll tell you, I don't think I'll make much as a movie star.
Are you guys planning on being up this way in the future here?
Well,
The 26th of May.
we haven't made any definite plans other than come up to the graduation.
Oh,
Why?
yeah. I just wondered. I haven't seen you since summertime, it seems like.
Well,
Since Vinny got married.
we don't go north until it's summertime.
Well, it's summer now. There's not one spot of snow left.
Oh, there's a few spots, but
There's a little bit of ice and little patches. But
Well, we'll have to see how things go, but we've got to say goodbye. For now, I know this is costing you a fortune.
yes, of course. Okay.
Thanks again. Love
Bye.
you.
catch you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Is there anything that you would do differently now that you've lived so much of your life?
Horrors. A lot of things I'd do differently. But I don't know whether I should tell it.
What would you want your
Hmm?
What would you want your great-grandchildren to know about you?
That I had a testimony of the gospel, and that if I was to do anything over again, it would be to study more about the gospel so that I could be able to share it more with others and live a better life myself. I could tell you a couple of incidences that have happened in my life to strengthen my testimony. In fact, one day I was just jotting down a few things that I was going to write about and never have. For instance, about being administered to for illnesses. I've had some very traumatic healings. Actually, when I was in high school, I had a very bad sinus infection from swimming. I had to take a swimming class in high school, and I got an infection in my sinuses, and it was so bad that the pain was so excruciating, it just didn't let up. And I went to the doctor, and he couldn't do anything for it. And it was before antibiotics, and so there wasn't much I could do except use the heat and rest and liquids and that kind of thing. And finally, I asked if I could be administered to. And after I was administered to, Mother said, "We've heard of a doctor who has a new treatment that we can try on you." And it was putting some ultraviolet rays up into my nose and into my sinuses. And that treatment broke up the sinus infection, and I got completely better. So it wasn't one of those times when I was healed instantly, but we were directed what to do to get the help we needed. But another time when we were up in Washington, I took the children swimming down Lake Forest Park in Lake Washington, and I got down under the water, and I got some of that water in my sinuses, and I got another sinus infection. I didn't realize it was so bad. I thought I had a toothache. And I went to the dentist, and he says, "That's infection in your sinuses." And I went to the doctor and had a shot of penicillin, and that didn't even help. So finally I called on Reed and asked him if he would administer to me, and he called Bishop Fagg, and the two of them came out, laid their hands on my head, and as they took their hands off my head, immediately the pain left. Just instantaneously. And they told me afterwards that when they performed that administration, they were drained. They were weak, and yet they felt the power go out of them into me. It was that dramatic. And so I know that the priesthood is power, and it's the power that our Heavenly Father gives to those who are worthy to administer it. Another time I was administered to was when I'd gone up to visit Scott. It was 2 months after Reed had passed away, and I'd gone up to visit Scott, and while I was there, I had a very serious attack of cramps, and it just got progressively worse. It started in about 4 o'clock at night, 4 o'clock in the morning, and I didn't want to disturb him, so I didn't call on him, but they just kept getting worse and worse until 7 o'clock. I finally called for help, and he called Dan DeMartini to come over, and they administered to me. And then Dan says to Scott, "We need to get her into the hospital." So they took me over to the Kaiser Hospital, and I underwent a series of tests, and they couldn't find out what was wrong with me. And for 12 hours, till 7 o'clock that night, I was in this excruciating pain. Even with the painkillers, it didn't help it. And finally the doctor came in, but before that, I had become as white as a sheet, and the blood had all drained out of me, out of my face anyway. And the doctor came in and said, you're going to have to decide whether you want to be operated on, or whether we should wait until morning and see what happens. And I didn't know what to do, and Scott was there, and he says, "Mom, I don't want to lose you. Don't be operated on." And so I asked to be administered to. And as they took their hands off of my head, the life came back into me. My body turned pink and instead of gray. And even the lady next door to me, in the next bed to me, she says she never saw such a change in a person as came over me at that time. And after I was administered to, I knew then what I needed to do, and that was to be operated on. So they rushed me into the operating room, and on the way in, I told the doctor, I said, "I'm not worried a bit." I said, "I prayed that the Lord would bless you to know what to do and guide your hands." And he said, "Thank you, I appreciate that." And they did an exploratory surgery and discovered that I had a strangulated colon. And they said afterwards it was a good thing I didn't wait, or I may not have made it through the night. So I was thankful for that. And my prayers have been answered a lot. one experience I did want to tell you about, and tell my family about, is the time that I found a tooth. Shelley Neimer, the daughter of a very dear friend of mine, Margaret Neimer, had been in a car accident, and I had heard about it, and while at work, I had talked to her on the phone, and she told me about it, and so I called over to the hospital. I don't know why, but I just felt like I ought to go over and see if there's anything I could do. And I went into the emergency room, and she was there. Wasn't really hurt too bad, but she'd lost her tooth. Well, it so happened her girlfriend was there, and her father was a dentist. And I said, I'd read that you could replace a tooth if you get it back in time when it's been knocked out. And she says, yes, my father has even replaced teeth. And I said, why don't you and I go out and see if we can find that tooth? And we didn't even have any idea where it was, just a faint idea where it was. That she described the place where it was over by on the road by the canal. And this was around 5 o'clock at night, or 5:30 or 6 o'clock, I guess, by then. So we started out in our car with our flashlights and got over to the place and started looking. And lo and behold, it was a road that had white gravel on it, and the sides were covered with ivy on both sides of it. So we looked for the place where the accident had happened. It had been a head-on collision that had knocked her into the windshield, knocked her tooth out. And we saw some place where it looked like they'd washed the road, and we thought, well, this must be the place. So we started looking around to see if we could find a tooth, with no luck. And so after looking for a while, I says, let's pray for help. We'll never find it without help. So I offered a prayer, and she offered a prayer. And just as I said amen, a lady came out of the apartment and says, what are you girls looking for? And we said, we're looking for the place where the accident happened this afternoon. She said, oh, you're in the wrong place. It's down here. And she showed us exactly where the accident happened. So we went down there and started looking around. And all we could see was this white gravel. And so I continued to pray for help. I says, we've got to find that tooth, and we've got to find it right now. And Heavenly Father, the only way we're going to do it is if you show us where it is. And all at once, I could just feel myself drawn to this place, and my hand went down, and I wasn't even looking where my hand went. And I felt something. I looked down, and there was a little piece of white sticking up out of the ground. And I took a hold of it, pulled it up, and here's this great big long tooth, that big, that was buried straight down in the ground. And all it was showing was that much. And I pulled that tooth out of the ground. And I took it back and gave it to Margaret. And in the meantime, before I left, I says, you get a hold of the dentist and tell him I'm bringing that tooth back, and be ready to get that tooth back in her mouth. And so she did. She got the dentist, and he was down in the office waiting. They took it over and put it in her mouth. Now, if that wasn't a sign of a true answer to a prayer, I don't know what was. It was really a thrill. I could go on like this, but I better not say any more. Oh, I could tell you about the time we had car trouble when Ruth Greenman and her 3 children and I were traveling to Salt Lake, and her car started flashing that there was motor trouble. And so we got out of the car. It had been raining and all along, and when we stopped the car and got out, the rain stopped. And she opened up the hood and checked it and couldn't find what was causing the problem. It wasn't the oil or anything like that. But we didn't dare move the car because it said that there was something wrong. So we thought we'd better see if we can get some help. So I went out and started trying to hail someone down. And I was on crutches. I was standing there with my crutches and thought, well, maybe someone will stop if they see me on crutches. And that didn't help at all. In fact, the truck drivers would just wave at me and go on. And so I gave a little prayer then and asked that someone would come by and stop that knew something about cars. And I opened my eyes, and here comes a car, pulls up and stops and says, I see you're in trouble. Is there anything we can do to help you? I says, do you know anything about cars? And he says, well, yes, I do. And he checked things over, and he said, well, I don't see what's wrong with the car, but I'll tell you what, you drive on, and we'll follow you. And if anything develops, I'll be right here to help you. And he followed us into the next town, and he said, if we don't find anything seriously wrong, we'll go on. Otherwise, we'll stay here in the town until you get your car fixed. So that was another example of how our Heavenly Father looks after us. I sure felt the spirit of our Heavenly Father when I was called to positions of leadership in the church, in the primary and Relief Society and the MIA. And I know I couldn't have done it without the help of the Lord. There's one thing more that I'd like to mention. That was when Reed was in the hospital. He had been laying there for, I think it was June until December, flat on his back, waiting for his leg to heal. And the doctors had said that they couldn't wait any longer. They'd have to decide whether to let him, they have a bone graft or let him get up and take a chance, or put him in a cast and let him get up. And he'd already gone through a bone graft once before, and at that time we were prompted to go ahead with the bone graft, which was the right thing to do at that time, or his leg wouldn't have healed then. But this time he felt like if he could just get up and get around, it would improve the circulation so his bone would heal. But the doctors didn't agree with him. And so they were going to have a consultation with all the staff to see what would be the best thing to do. And the doctor I talked to says that they were of the opinion that they would have to bone graft. And because he didn't want to go through that operation again, which would have been a 50-50 chance that he wouldn't have pulled through without getting infection or something worse, the members of the ward and I fasted and prayed that the Lord would inspire them to do the right thing for him. and that if it was the Lord's will that he wouldn't have to go through the operation, that it would be made known. And so after the meeting, the doctor called me and said, we were all of the opinion to do the bone graft, and then all at once we got this feeling that we shouldn't do it, that he should be allowed to get up on crutches and get around. Now, I just know, and so does Reed, and so do all those who fasted for him, that that was a direct answer to the prayer, because he was allowed to go home at Christmas time on crutches and his bone healed. And so the feelings, the experiences I've had have been wonderful, faith-promoting experiences. And thanks to the adversity in my life, I have gained a strong testimony of the truthfulness of the gospel and the existence of a Heavenly Father who watches over me, and a Savior who has suffered for me, forgiven me of my sins, and comforted me in my trials. And each such experience has continued to nurture and strengthen that testimony throughout my life. And I am grateful for that. And I end my story with this thought, for I am truly blessed, and I thank my Heavenly Father in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you for a fitting end to a beautiful Easter Sunday.